mascot area. There's a little building there out to here. And he was here for 11 years. So he's preached a lot and taught a lot. And one of the first things that I heard about when I came here was what a great teacher he was. So the elders said, listen, this is a no-brainer. If he's willing and available and has time to come and do something with us and for us, we love it. So we just appreciate the fact that he's able to step up to the plate and help us out, because Bryce is having to be out with the youth since we don't have a youth minister. And so he's really the best one in our mindset to go out and be with the youth right now. And so he's leading them. And that meant that we needed somebody in here. And all of us elders, when we thought of David, said, let him do it. So it's really going to be a big help to us. But as you know, most of us are busy doing several things in addition to what this might have been. So it's a big help to us as elders and leaders, and we appreciate it very much from that standpoint. But also to be blessed by him, because we know he is a good Bible student. He comes from a strong Christian family. It's his daughter who is our children's director. Her name is Janet. Most of you have seen her around. She goes there eating today. So it's his daughter, and it's his son who's back there in the tech booth. So we're getting the whole family here just a little bit. So that's great. And mom and dad right here, Ray and Betty are here. They've been here since I've been here. And so we're just delighted that he's able and willing to come. So let's take some prayer requests first of all, and we just kind of throw it over for that. Yeah.
Right before we came, I called Joe to see how Ann was doing. He just brought her home from the hospital.
Okay. This is Dr. Insminger.
Yeah, Insminger. And they still don't know why she is losing blood, but they're going to do some work on that on Friday to run some tests and see what's going on. But anyway, she's home tonight, so.
Well, yeah, she's having a real weak time, and so they finally found out that she had lost blood, so that internally someplace is going on. So that's a pretty scary thing to think about. We need good guidance and good strength and protection during all of this. So let's be in prayer for Joe and Insminger. So we need to find out what's going on. Anyone else? Prayer for
Any youth minister prospect?
Youth minister prospect. I'll be glad to tell you what we know. We have a young man that we've had face time with, Facebook time with, and he lives in Michigan. Daniel knows him. His main forte is really music. He had, I think, a double major in bass guitar or something like that. I think it was a little focus, on the instrument side. But he's been in church ministry work. Now he worked for Youth for Christ for a couple of years, and he had been in youth ministry and church work, working with volunteers and teachers and things like this. Very pleasant person, had a good give and take session, and nice smile. So he is getting married sometime in December or January. He's about 30 years old, as I remember. So he's had for like 6 or 7 years out in the field in church work and Christian work. So he's got that experience with him. You want to add anything to that, Tom?
No, we're hoping to get him here I think the first week in September we were shooting for, but I haven't heard yet whether we were able to work that out.
Right.
And then I heard there was another guy possibly from Ocala that we heard about and we're going to follow up on.
Right. So we just keep saying, Lord, bring us the right one, and keep doing the interviewing. So we'll see. Bill Jones is actually driving from his home in Ohio into Michigan this Sunday, and going to be meeting with him and his fiancee with him. So that'll be a big help in assessing things. To what his name is. His name is Wesley?
Jacob.
Jacob where are you, Wesley? Jacob. What's his last name? Webster. Yeah, Jacob Webster. So we'll let you know. We'll keep working at it. But do keep that in prayer. We want the right person, for sure. We're not just jumping at everything. Anything else?
We had quite a few visitors on Sunday.
We did have a lot of visitors, didn't we? Yeah, the Lord bringing good people here, and, we have a special event tonight, after when this service concludes, we actually are going to be having a baptism to enjoy, so if you want to hang around for that, you can, or slip one out, but then we're excited about that as well, a new couple, that have been here just a few Sundays, and so, a very exciting time for that. All right, let's go to God in prayer. Father, now we thank you that your word has been preserved for us. And so many people paid a high price so that we could be here to study what you've preserved for us through the years. People have died for this work. People have sacrificed so greatly that we could just have a Bible to study, to understand, and to be able to allow your Spirit to work through it. Help us, Father, to be a responsible body of believers who serves you, loves you, and loves each other in the right way. That we can just, you can be proud of us. Be with David and Isaac teaches, and us as we listen. In Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Okay, so do any of you have a particular favorite Old Testament commentary? Anybody have a favorite Old Testament commentary? Nobody? Oh yeah, Kyle and Delish, yeah. Two of my favorites are Albert Barnes, who was a 19th century Presbyterian preacher, I think, but he wrote a very deep and conservative commentary on the Old Testament. And then another one is Matthew Henry, who was from the 18th century. And what I like about Matthew Henry is he makes almost everything look ahead to Jesus. I think sometimes almost to an extreme, if that's possible with Jesus. But I really appreciated that about him. But I won't be using either one of them in our study of understanding Old Testament prophecy for two reasons. One reason is I don't have them anymore. We sold our house in Claremont, and we are now living in our camper on Matt and Jana's property until we get another house, which when that happens, it's going to be much smaller than the house we had, so we've given away a lot of stuff, including most of my books. So, because I thought I was done teaching, you know. So, when Bill Eaton called me and asked if I'd be interested in teaching something on Wednesday night until you get a youth minister, my first words were kind of like, well, I don't have any of my tools. I've given them all away. And what I do have left are in storage and would be very difficult to get to. So I told him I'd talk to Carla and pray and think about it. And the more I thought about it, I said, okay. So I don't have Albert Barnes. I don't have Matthew Henry or Kyle and Delish, which I did used to have, but I gave that away. But I do have the best Old Testament commentary of all, the New Testament. The New Testament is without a doubt the best commentary on the Old Testament. In fact, it's the only inspired commentary written by the same author that wrote the Old Testament. So I got to thinking, why not use the New Testament to find all the places where the New Testament quotes or refers to the Old Testament and fill our minds with the way the New Testament uses the Old Testament terminology, words and phrases, and then let that be the basis for our interpretation of the Old Testament. So that's what we're going to do for however long I teach this class. I don't know if it's going to be a month or if it's going to be a year. I have no idea. But we're going to let the New Testament show us what he meant when he wrote the Old Testament. Sound logical? Make sense? So here's what we are going to do, and I've put these down in 6 steps. First of all, we're going to find all the places where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. All right? So step number 1 is going to be where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. All right? Now, that's kind of a project, but it's going to be a very objective list, I guess you might say, because they're just right there. It's pretty easy. Most of us, whether I'm a liberal or a conservative or a premillennial or a postmillennial or an amillennial or even an atheist would come up with the same list, basically. It takes some doing, but it's not really all that difficult to find all the places where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, because most of our Bibles in some way or another highlight the Old Testament quotes. I use the New American Standard, and it puts the Old Testament quotes in italics. So if each of us were to take this on as a project, let's say, we would come up with nearly the same list. If we all worked on it independently, we'd all come up with nearly the same list. Maybe 99, 98% the same. All right, so step number one is going to be, we're going to find all the places where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. All right, questions on step number one? All right, pretty basic. All right, step number two is going to be, for each place in the New Testament that quotes the Old Testament, we're going to find the corresponding Old Testament quotation. All right, so we're going to, step number two is going to be find the corresponding, I'll go ahead and write that out, corresponding Old Testament verse, or it might be verses, okay? For example, all right, turn your Bibles to Matthew 1:23. This just happens to be the very first one. So if you're going to make a list, this is, this is where you would start. Matthew 1:23. Matthew 1:23 in the New American Standard, it's in like a small caps, all right? And it says, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which translated means God with us. All right? So if we were making, let me just draw a piece of paper here that might represent our list, okay? And first of all, we've got our New Testament. We're gonna list all of our New Testament places. The first one is going to be Matthew 1:23. All right? That's going to be our first one. I know that's probably kind of small, but it's kind of a small board, and I got a lot to write. All right, so do you see, most of you will have that set out in some way, italics or small caps or bold or something in some way. It's set out to show you that this is a quote from the Old Testament. And notice verse 22, what verse 22 says. Verse 22 says, all this took place. All what took place? Well, the birth of Jesus. All this took place that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled, saying. And then he quotes from an Old Testament prophet, all right? And that's set out in a different typeface in my Bible. Now, you probably have some kind of a footnote in your Bible that will tell you the Old Testament source. What verse is Matthew quoting from the Old Testament? Anybody have it? Isaiah 7:14. So let's go back to Isaiah 7:14. You might want to keep your pencil there or a marker there in Matthew. Isaiah 7:14. All right, Isaiah 7:14 says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel." All right, so we've got the Old Testament source, I guess you might say, is Isaiah 7:14. All right, now, if each of us were taking this on as a project and we had a piece of paper or whatever and we were going to start with our list, right now I think we'd be 100% in agreement. All of us would have gotten Matthew 1:23. I mean, it's the very first one. Your footnote shows it's Isaiah 7:14, and I think we all have exactly the same information. It's pretty solid, pretty objective. Now, there's going to be a few places as you go through the New Testament and look at those places that quotes from the Old Testament. There's going to be a few places where maybe the Septuagint is quoted. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, all right? It's written usually with these, it's represented by this Roman numeral right here, LXX, which if you remember your Roman numerals is what? 70, yeah, 50 plus 10 plus 10. The reason for that is because there were 70 scholars, some say 72, 6 from each of the 12 tribes. 6 times 12 is 72, could have been 72, but anyway, 70 scholars approximately that wrote, that translated the Old Testament into Greek. And some places in the New Testament quote the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. Now, why is that important? Well, I'm glad that God did that, because it's almost like God is giving His approval for translations and paraphrases. I mean, how important is a translation? Otherwise, we'd all be sitting here with Greek copies of the New Testament or a Hebrew copy of the Old Testament, and you can't read it. But you've got all of these great translations and paraphrases, and I think God, by having His writers quote from, instead of from the Hebrew, sometimes they quoted from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It was like God was giving His approval for that. And to me, that's good. But again, if we were to take this on as a project and go through and make a list of all the places in the New Testament that quote the Old Testament, and we went all the way through, I mean, let's just forget Revelation because it's so jam-packed full of references, it's almost impossible to do. But if we went all the way through the New Testament, all the way through 3 John and Jude, and we compared our list, I think our list would be pretty much in agreement. Our list would be essentially the same. All right, so we've got 2 steps. New Testament quotes the Old Testament, all those places, a list. Find the corresponding Old Testament verse or verses, you make a list. On to step number 3, unless you have any questions. All right, step number 3 is to read the New Testament context. Read the New Testament context. We want to know what the New Testament, which is divinely inspired, what does it do with the Old Testament passage? How is it using it? For example, if I was reading Isaiah chapter 40, I probably wouldn't guess, unless I already knew, I probably wouldn't guess that John the Baptist was the voice in the wilderness. If I had read Isaiah for the very first time and I come across this voice in the wilderness, I wouldn't just automatically say, wow, that must be John the Baptist. But when I get to the New Testament, and the New Testament tells me who the voice in the wilderness is that Isaiah was referring to, then when I go, and I know that that's John the Baptist, now when I go back to Isaiah chapter 40 and I read that, at least that section there, I should automatically be thinking about John, who the New Testament tells me is the voice in the wilderness. That's an inspired commentary on Isaiah chapter 40. And so as I read the context of the New Testament, of the verse that I've put in my list here, I read the context, I'm going to be able to see how the New Testament uses this Old Testament passage. All right, so we're looking at Matthew 1:23 and Isaiah 7:14, right? So we're going to flip back and forth here 1 or 2 times. So Matthew chapter 1 again, verse number 23. Now the verse, the specific verse that's quoted is Matthew 1:23. But what's the context? How is Matthew using it? Well, the context, and you're all familiar with this, the context is the birth of Jesus. So how far back, what verse would you pick as the starting context, probably, of this particular Old Testament quote? And this is where it begins to be a little more subjective rather than objective. But where would you probably start? What verse? You go back and read the verse before it. Now all this took place that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Well, that's definitely a part of the context. What about the verse before that? She will bear a son. He'll call his name Jesus, for it's he who will save us save his people from their sins. All this took place because. Well, sure. In fact, you go back, probably most of us would pick the beginning point of this particular context to be verse 18. Because verse 18 says, now, the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. Mary, Joseph, the angel in a dream says, you're to have a son. You'll name him Jesus because he's going to save us from our sins. And all this took place to fulfill what Isaiah said. When he said, behold, in verse 23, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. And Joseph rose from his sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanded him, took her as his wife, and kept her a virgin until she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. That would be the context. It would not include probably chapter 2. That's a whole different story. Now we're getting into the wise men, the Magi, right? But the context would probably be chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. And again, I think most of us, if we were working on this independently, we would probably pick that or somewhere around there as our beginning point of this context. So in this particular case here, in this one, the context is going to be verses 18 through, what was the last one? 25. 25. A little bit more subjective, because I guess if you wanted to, you could go all the way back to the very first verse in the chapter, because it gives the genealogy of Jesus. You could go all the way back there. But what this does is, as we look at the context, and we understand what this verse is talking about, then as we go back into Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14, our mind needs to go towards to the birth of Jesus Christ, right? That's where it needs to go. And so that helps us to understand what it is that we're talking about. And again, we would come away if we're going through the Old Testament and we're coming up with a list of verses. And by the way, some verses that are quoted in the New Testament are not prophecies. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23 certainly is, but if you go over, for example, to the 4th chapter of Matthew and verse number 4, this is during the temptation of Jesus, and Satan says in verse number 3, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But Jesus answered and said, it is written. So here, Jesus is going to quote from the Old Testament. It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. No, that's not a prophecy, not a prediction of something that was going to happen in the future. It's just a verse that Jesus quoted to help him get through, this time of temptation, much like you and I do. We've got certain verses that we can quote to help us get through certain events in our life, or just some of our favorite verses, but they're not necessarily Old Testament an Old Testament prophecy. But again, the context tells us what the prophecy was referring to, especially if it's a prophecy. Now, I may not agree necessarily with how the New Testament uses the Old Testament quote. Now, hopefully I do, because if I don't, I've got real problems. I may not agree with how the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, but I should be able to understand how it is being used in most cases. An example, Matthew chapter 2 and verse 15. The verse 15 says, and was there until the death of Herod, that what was spoken of by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled, saying, out of Egypt did I call my son. Well, that's the verse that's quoted. Where is that quotation from in the Old Testament? Hosea 11:1. So keep your finger there in Matthew and flip back to Hosea chapter 11 and verse 1. Now, if we didn't have Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, if that wasn't in there, and you were reading Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, which says, "When Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son." What would you be thinking about? The deliverance out of Egypt, right? And of course, that's what you'd be thinking about. Because when Israel was a youth, I did love him, and I called him out of Egypt, called my son out of Egypt. But Matthew says not only is it a reference back to that great event in the Old Testament, but that also in some way it was a prophecy, a prediction of Jesus leaving the land of Egypt after he was taken there by his parents. That's what he says here. Look at the context in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 13. Here's the context. "When they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, 'Arise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him.' So they did that in verse number 14. And in verse 15, "And they were there in Egypt until the death of Herod, that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled." That's pretty plain. Saying, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Now, you may not agree with how Matthew uses that. Again, I'd say if you do, then you've got a problem, okay? You may not agree with it. You may look at Hosea 11:1 and says, "No way. That is not talking about Jesus. I don't care what Matthew says." But Matthew, who is an inspired writer, says that that event fulfilled the prophecy in chapter 11, verse 1. Now, you may not agree with what Matthew says, but you certainly understand what Matthew is saying. And I would hope that all of us here are in agreement with that when Matthew says that fulfilled prophecy, indeed it did. Now, so it would be up to us to figure out how in the world does that work? How does that fit in with what Hosea says in chapter 11, verse 1? But still, that's exactly what Matthew says. Bob?
When I came across that verse and it intrigued me,
Yeah.
at Matthew 2:15, I thought I would go to a Greek scholar and find out some information about Matthew quoting that verse. I went to William Barclay. He was obviously a plant within the Church of England to mislead pastors and colleges and seminaries. He said that all throughout Matthew's gospel, he misquoted the Old Testament. An apostle, a 20th century Bible teacher saying an apostle
Misquoted?
the Old Testament
Yeah.
regularly.
Well, yeah, I've got a problem with that. Any other questions on step number 3, reading the New Testament context? Okay, now step 4 is going to be related to that, because step 4 is to read the verse in the Old Testament. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to go back, because Matthew 1:23 is so easy. It's the very first one. Go there, and also back to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, all right? Just so we can have both of those, right there in front of us. All right, so step number 4 is going to be to read the verse in the Old Testament, in this case, Isaiah 7:14, the verse that's quoted by the New Testament. And then what we're going to do is we're going to note the major words and phrases of the verse. All right? The major words and phrases of the verse. All right, so here again is the verse, Isaiah 7:14. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign." And here's what was quoted. "Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel." Now this is where we get into more of a subjective, determining which are the important words and phrases. But I think if we sat down, if we gave this verse to a fourth grader, that fourth grader would probably not pick out words like the and, the fourth grader would probably pick out virgin, conceive, son, Emmanuel. Those are the important words and phrases, important words in this particular verse. You might pick another one or two, and that'd be fine. What we're doing here is as we list these words for this particular quote, now we are seeing how the New Testament is using the Old Testament verse. And we know that those particular words and phrases in that verse, that they refer to the birth of Jesus Christ. And so this kind of, as we go through the New Testament and we compile our list of New Testament quotes and Old Testament sources, and we look at the context and we write down the major words and phrases of each of these, we're going to be coming up with some ideas that these particular words and these particular phrases ought to trigger in our mind what it is that the New Testament is talking about. So that, let's just say, for an example, that if I came across some other place in the Old Testament, I'm not saying whether there is or isn't, but let's say I came across some other place in the Old Testament that's not quoted in the New Testament, but it uses the word Emmanuel. What would I automatically think, at least at first? It's probably talking about the birth of Jesus. And that's the whole idea of this that I'm presenting to you, is to look at the New Testament, the way the New Testament uses the Old Testament, and to connect words and phrases with the idea that is being used here by the Old Testament prophet, and then, of course, the New Testament writer as well. He's connecting those two together, all right? So the Old Testament context is reading the New Testament context, and also we're making a list here now of the major words and phrases. And right now that's just kind of a list is all it is. But it's a list that's going to work its way into our mind as we begin to connect words and phrases with the idea that's being presented here in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Fairly objective, maybe not as objective as steps 1 and 2, which are basically just a list of verses, but fairly objective. But it's filling our minds with the New Testament approach to understanding the Old Testament prophecy. And I think that's pretty important, since the Holy Spirit is behind both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The same author, the New Testament being the only inspired commentary on the Old Testament. So we ought to give first attention to what the New Testament says about the Old Testament, and to be especially observant of the New Testament repeated usage of particular words and phrases that should become triggers then as we're reading the Old Testament. Oh, I wonder if this is talking about that, because of how the New Testament has used those words and phrases. And that's what I'll be developing here as I go through this in the Old Testament, or in the Old and New Testament. Any questions on that? All right, step number 5 is to read the Old Testament context. Again, here we are in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. We're going to read the Old Testament context to try to determine how many verses here are talking about the same idea or event that is our main verse. So first of all, let's read the verse that is quoted. And that's Isaiah 7:14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. All right? So that's the verse that is quoted. Now, let's look at the context of this. Verse 15 says he will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. That's kind of weird, but it's still talking about the boy, or child anyway. Well, I guess it's a boy because it says he. Okay. Verse 16, for before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose 2 kings you dread will be forsaken. And then verse 17, the Lord will bring on you and your people and on your father's house such days as have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. All right. What about going backwards? I mean, it really kind of starts at verse number 10, where the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask, and Ahaz is the king of Judah. He says, ask for yourself a sign from the Lord your God. Make it as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Just ask me for a sign. And Ahaz says, oh, I'm not gonna do that. I can't ask or test the Lord. Then God said, listen now, O house of David, is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men that you will try the patience of my God as well? I told you to ask for a sign. You say I can't do it? So I'll give you a sign, was what God says. I'll give you a sign, verse 14. The Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. What do you do with that? I mean, as far as the context of that, because there's some weird stuff going on there, and then right in the middle of it is that verse that's quoted in the New Testament about the birth of Jesus Christ. How do you come up with a context here? Well, maybe you can't. Maybe there is no real context, but we should try to keep it as narrow as possible and yet kind of be practical. I would start probably with verse number 10, because that's where the whole story starts. This whole thing, this ask for a test and between God and Ahaz says, no, I'm not going to do it. And then God's going to give a sign. Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and we'll call his name Emmanuel. He'll do that in verse 15. Before he knows how to do good and evil, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. And then verse 17, is verse 17 a part of that context? I don't know. I like to be as conservative as possible, so I think I would probably just, at least for now, just make the context be verses 10 through 16 and maybe put 17 on the back burner. And later on down the road, if I find out, maybe 17 through 19 maybe is a part of the context of it, I can add it back in. But until then, I'm going to put verse 17 and the rest of it on the back burner until I, in other words, I want to deal first of all with the verses that are clearly talking about the same thing. And so maybe if that's the rule, we should stick just with verse 14. And then that's the whole context. And then verse number 6, here. I didn't even write step number 5 down, and that is to read the Old Testament context. Read the Old Testament context. And a lot of times, the context in the Old Testament is going to be fairly obvious. This particular one here was kind of, I don't know. Is it verse 13? Is it verse 15? It's at least verse 14, because that's the one that's quoted. All right, step number 6. This one is the hardest one of all. Any idea? It's one word. Any idea what it is? Think. That's the hardest one of all. Think. Once you've gone through and you've made your list of all the places where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, you've got all the Old Testament verses, all of those, written all the way down, several pages. You've got the context. You've got the major words and phrases that are listed there, all right? And you can see different places that are talking about the birth of Jesus, different places that are talking about the death of Jesus, different places that are talking about the resurrection of Jesus, along with their various words and phrases, all right? And so you think, you look at it, and you think. Think about how we have seen things develop in the first 5 steps. And if we do that, we will begin to see things happening that will help us to understand other verses in the Old Testament that are not quoted in the New Testament, but they use the same words and phrases as the ones that the New Testament is very clear about. That's the point of this whole thing here. And then what that does, it gives us an inspired basis for what God meant there in the place that's not quoted in the New Testament. Now, that's a project. But this is a much more reliable approach than checking a man-made commentary. And I'm not saying to throw man-made commentaries out. They certainly do have their purpose. So let's quickly review the steps, all right? Oh, step number 6, the hardest one of all, is to think. All right, so, yeah, Bill.
We end at 7, just, I don't think anybody told you.
Yeah, you did. That's why I looked at the clock right then. We're gonna list the places where the New Testament quotes the Old Testament. We're gonna find the corresponding Old Testament verse. We're gonna read the context of the New Testament. We're gonna list major words and phrases. We're gonna read the Old Testament context along with major words and phrases, and we're going to think. That's the hardest. But it's amazing how much our thinking will have been developed when we do the first 5 steps. By the time we get down to step number 6, some of the things will be so clear to us that it would be difficult for us not to come to certain conclusions about the Old Testament prophecy. Just as an example, let's say that you made a list of all the words and phrases in the Old Testament verses that had to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then you come to another verse in the Old Testament that's not quoted another verse in the Old Testament that's not quoted in the New Testament, but it uses those same ideas. That should tell you, man, the first thing I should consider when I'm looking at this is this could be talking about the resurrection of Jesus. And I can do the same thing with things that are talking about Jesus' ministry or his church. And we, of course, initially want to work through passages that are very clear and get those down before we start working our way through things that might be muddy, all right? And I think we could go home, and we will, but I think we could all go home, and if we all spent some time each week going through the New Testament and the Old Testament in these 6 steps, and if we didn't see each other for several years, and we came back together again to discuss our findings, I think we would be surprised how much in agreement we would be. Why? Because we have created as the basis of our understanding what the New Testament is telling us about the Old Testament. So, here's your homework for this week. Your homework is to do steps 1 and 2 of the book of Matthew. Just the book of Matthew. Do steps 1 and 2. Make a list of the places in the New Testament that are quoting some place from the Old Testament and find the corresponding Old Testament verse. Do as much of that as you can in the book of Matthew. Whether you do it on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, however you want to do it. That's your homework for next week. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What do you call this series you're teaching?
Well, I call it Understanding Old Testament Prophecy.
Gotcha.
I've never taught this before. I've used these principles before. For many years, I've used these principles, but I've never taught this before. So.
You grade on a curve?
Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's close. God, we thank you so much for your revelation to us. Not just the book of Revelation, but your complete revelation, Old Testament and New Testament, and how they work together so well. And it's not surprising because you are the author of both. We thank you for your consistency. We thank you for your love for us because that's exactly why you did all this. Thank you for sending your son and give us